No stairway. Denied.
Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John, they're the ones to follow. Get ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
John, this morning you can, instead of calling me Brad, you can just call me Bat, okay? B-A-T.
Because he's blind as a bat.
I'm blind as a bat. Yes.
You know what I was just thinking, Brad? I cannot wait this summer. I'm going to invite you to a certain pool that I like to frequent, and you and I are going to play Marco Polo because I know that you can't cheat.
I can't see.
I know you won't be able to find me, Brad.
I had a meltdown yesterday, and you know what? I apologize if I let my infirmities infiltrate the show on the air yesterday, but I was in utmost pain yesterday morning because my stupid eye. And I will say right off the bat, if you are someone who has some vision issues, I will give you the guy, not because of the fact that he's my doctor, but he really is a great guy. His name is Dr. Jeffrey J. Lant, L-A-N-T. Everybody calls him JJ, Dr. Lant. And he runs a company called Four Circles Vision Therapy. He's on Highway K. If you know where there's two Lufuse dealerships, there's the Dodge dealership and there's a Jeep dealership. If you know where the Jeep dealership is, he is literally across the parking lot from the Jeep dealership. Matter of fact, if you turn into the entrance for the Jeep dealership, you go to the right for the Jeep dealership, you go to the left, and you are in Dr. Lant's parking lot. So he saw me on very short notice yesterday, and I'll tell you what, I am still messed up. And I had my diagnosis from Dr. JJ, and quite honestly, it's not good. But I'll just leave it at that. So move on.
I'm sorry to hear that, Brad.
Well, I've had terrible eyesight problems since I've been 5 years old. I told the story yesterday morning about having the ill-fated LASIK surgery on one eye, which ironically, your friend and mine, Camelia, she sent me her driver's license, and her and I have the very same restriction Y, which is a very rare restriction. And being that she's a woman and I'm a dude, I'm not going to ask her why she has that, because of the fact that typically that means you only have vision in one eye, which is what I have. And
but hold on one second. We're letting women drive now, Brad?
and you know what, John? They can even have a credit card in their own name. Can you imagine?
Oh, God. Can you imagine? It's almost as if personal debt in the United States will explode by superfluous consumer purchases, Brad.
John, when you think about this, here's the thing, and we're going to get sidetracked right off the get-go because you brought this up.
That's okay. It's a unique day, Brad.
The women's rights, I believe the year was 1920, when women officially became full citizens. Because up until that date, and we're in the year 2024, so we're talking in the history of this country, which is now coming up on 250 years old, more than half of the history of the country, women did not have the same rights as men. Now, I'm not trying to pick a fight or anything like that, but when were the slaves freed as far as the United States government was concerned? Wasn't that like 1864,
1865, I believe. 1864, 1865, yeah.
1865. So the black slaves, and there were other slaves besides black, but the majority, the super majority of slaves were black people. The slaves were freed, What's 1865? That would be 150 years ago? Something like that?
Yeah, it seems about right.
Okay, so how is it that women have had less freedom for a less amount of time than the black people?
Well, if you think that I have an easy answer for that, Brad. You can't say that all black people go crazy for a few days based on a lunar cycle. By the way, if any of you ladies are in your luteal phase, you know how to reach me. I don't want to hear you unless you're ovulating. If you're ovulating, we'll talk.
John, who is just
somebody's got to repopulate this earth, Brad. I'm doing my part.
who will never say anything offensive to women. That's John. Okay, and he's the guy that every single day puts together the John Combest list, and we start off the show with...
Time for the John Combest Top 3.
And how do we do that? We bring this guy into the studio, and what does he do?
Now on with the countdown.
And he starts off with...
In third place,
41 hours, Brad. No, that's not how long it took for you to find the correct buttons on the show this morning. 41 hours was how long the conservative Freedom Caucus filibustered in the Missouri Senate yesterday. It ended early this morning, Brad. They had a number of demands, and the group, led by Bill Eigel, ceased their filibuster early this morning. The group will be back in action. The Senate, I should say, will be back in action Monday afternoon. They're going to be talking about initiative petitions. They're going to be talking about the budget going forward. You ask, John, what's the point of filibustering? Why did they do this? Well, if you listen to Bill Eigel and the Freedom Caucus, they say that they wanted demands on some conservative legislation. I should say they had demands, and they wanted to see action on conservative legislation. Now, Brad, the crux of this whole thing, going back to Caleb Rowden and the whole taking away of parking spots and furniture, the whole crux of this thing is that the Freedom Caucus seems to say, we want action now. We want it on our timeline. And other Republicans who call themselves the majority of the majority say, we're going to get to it. Stop your fussing. Stop making a scene. We're going to get to it. And really, Brad, this is in the backdrop, as we all know, of a lot of these folks are running for statewide office, and there's a whole lot of personality clash and some policy clash, to be fair here too, Brad. So anyway, the Senate filibuster ended, and as I understand it, Brad, depending on how you do the math, the Freedom Caucus set a record for longest filibuster in the Missouri Senate.
Ever?
Yeah, ever.
In the history of the Senate?
There were some members of the media, kind of the Nattering Nabobs of negativity, who were like,
well, actually, it's actually not a record because in 2016, Democrats filibustered. Yeah, that's our team.
But depending on how you calculate it, by most calculations, the Freedom Caucus set a filibuster record. Yeah, they had a rotating crew of folks who would go in and filibuster. So, Brad, what it means is we have 2 weeks left of session, and as seems to be the pattern the last few years, the legislature will be in a race to pass the budget, and constitutionally the budget has to be passed by next Friday.
For those of you on checking your bingo card, Nattering Nabobs of negativism, which is a phrase that was uttered before John Combest was even born, if I'm not mistaken.
Now, that was Spiro Agnew, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Or was it wasn't Tricky Dick. I think it was Spiro Agnew.
It was Spiro Agnew, like in 1971 or something like that, which I do believe was before you were born, correct?
Oh, absolutely. But you know what, Brad? As I often say, when the entitlement and victimhood crowd is always like, but we can't teach certain words and aspects of history. Well, everybody has access to history books, Brad. If you don't know who Spiro Agnew is, if you don't know who John Dean and G. Gordon Liddy are, it doesn't mean you need to read. It means you need to listen to more of BJ Show.
Nattering Nabobs of negativism was a
negativity,
phrase,
I think, right?
Negativity, yes. Nattering Nabobs say it again.
Nattering Nabobs of negativity
was a phrase used by Spiro T. Agnew at the time, the Vice President of the United States, who was referring to journalists. That's what he was calling
That's
us.
what they are. And boy, what a great descriptor that was. Was he the canary in the coal mine about the liberal media, or what, Brad?
Well, the crazy thing about this is that he was at that point in time, it wasn't the liberal media, it was just the media. And I say that in the timeline of history, that it wasn't the person that drew attention to the fact that what is now referred to as the mainstream media, which is ABC, NBC, CBS, the big news organizations, Associated Press, UPI, Reuters, people like that. That was our buddy Rush Limbaugh, who essentially brought that to the attention of people that, and once again, if you don't believe us when we say this, the guy who just recently put the hit piece on his own employer, but he's not employed there anymore. The dude from what was his name? Yuri Berliner.
Yeah, Berliner. Yep.
The guy from NPR who essentially said of the 87 editors, 87 of them are registered Democrats, and then one of the NPR people in defense said, "Well, that's not necessarily true. We did more research, and we did find 87 registered Democrats, but we also found 10 registered independents." But you notice she didn't say there were any Republicans because there aren't any.
Of course not, Brad. Of course not. And the independents could have been Democratic Socialists.
Well,
I went to Megan Green's Twitter profile the other day, Brad. Do you know that Megan Green, president of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen, does not identify necessarily as a Democrat? She calls herself a Democrat socialist.
Man, okay. Ask anybody from Cuba what they think of socialism. Okay, here's number 2.
Up a notch to number 2.
Oh, speaking of, Brad, I guess, one of the great things about this show is that you and I can have a dialogue because I believe in freedom, and you, as we established yesterday, are a known Zionist. But maybe we can have this discussion anyway, Brad. At SLU, we had a big protest yesterday. Now, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, to be clear, gives 2 numbers. In the news article, they say 300 protesters came out to get in the way and block, people who work for a living at Grand Boulevard. And then later on, they post a video that says there were 500 people there. But whatever. It's a big crowd. And they were, of course, protesting, Brad, the genocide that's been perpetrated by Zionists like Brad Hildebrand and others in Gaza. And the best part of the Post-Dispatch story, Brad, I think the most noteworthy piece of the Post-Dispatch story is you get one educated guess about who showed up at the protest.
Was it the Slyman brothers?
It was the Slyman brothers, and it was actually Uncle Leonard was there. You remember Uncle Leonard?
Uncle Leonard and the Mizrahi boys were there?
They were there, and Becky, Queen of Carpets. So they were there incognito, but they had the what's the like the head wrap thing, the dish towel thing, and then they had the mask on, so you couldn't tell who they were. However, Brad, Valentina Gomez was in the house.
She was in St. Louis?
Most of her opponents are in Jeff City doing legislative things. But Valentina and her brother were there, and they were carrying the flag, the United States flag, and just generally being freedom fighters, Brad. They're being the meme heroes that we all didn't know that we needed, but that we certainly want.
John, we got to get her on the air, but you don't want to do that, right? I've said this a couple times.
Absolutely, yeah. We're not having a parade of idiots coming through and that's not to say Valentina's an idiot, but I mean, we're not going to have a parade of 8 candidates clogging up the airways. Even our friend Mary Elizabeth Coleman, when she was on the show, Brad, remember she said, "Look, I know you guys aren't going to have a parade of candidates coming through." I will point out, Brad, that also on JohnComest.com today, we have a piece. The media is really mad that they didn't get Dean Plocker's scalp. And so they're doing stories of, it's still going to be bad for him. And, they found a couple people that don't have much going on in their campaign that'll try to make the Dean Plocker issue an issue. But uniquely, Brad, Valentina Gomez said that Dean Plocker should be in jail right next to Hunter Biden.
I don't think Hunter Biden's in jail. That's the only problem.
I know. They'd be great cellmates, though, wouldn't they?
The interesting thing about this system we have, this justice system, which let's say 80% of the time it works pretty well, 15% of the time not so well, 5% the wheels fall off. There are certain things you go like, okay, if Hunter Biden wasn't the president's son, where would he be right now? And the answer would probably be in jail, right? I mean,
yeah, and that was the subject of the Afro Man song "Hunter Got High." Afro Man says, if Hunter Biden looked like me, let's run through the things that would have happened to Hunter Biden.
Well, and to a certain point, he's right.
He is, absolutely.
I mean, okay, let's move on.
The number one.
Number one. I hit the buttons right this morning.
In a week where we've had some heavy issues, Brad, we have Gaza going on. We have the Freedom Caucus filibuster. We have Brad having his eye replaced with a mere marble. It's good to know that I thought we could probably just cleanse our political palate, Brad, and go back to a political topic we can all enjoy, which is general pettiness. Do you like general pettiness, Brad?
I thought he was a great commander in World War II.
I thought he was. And General Petticoat was actually a little bit better. And you can read about it at Petticoat Junction. However, let's just cleanse our palate with a little general pettiness, Brad. The governor of Missouri, Governor Parson, had appointed a bunch of people to boards. In fact, boards and commissions. Now, in fact, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Brad, and we talked about the fact that it's mainly ceremonial, but he had some really good people and some noteworthy names in there. A guy named Winston Calvert, who was an alumni of Mayor Slay and Sam Page. He had Lyda Crewson, the former St. Louis mayor. I'll cut to the chase, Brad. In general, gubernatorial appointments are sponsored by the state senator in which the appointee lives. However, here's the catch, Brad. State Senator Stephen Roberts from St. Louis City is not supporting these folks, or I should say is unwilling to stand by these nominees. And he says that the governor did not do him the courtesy of reaching out to him ahead of time to get his blessing for these appointees. So we'll get 30 seconds on the minutia of this, as I understand it, is the governor needs to withdraw the nominations before he can resubmit them, if he chooses to resubmit at all. But here's the catch, Brad, and here's where it gets really interesting. Steve Roberts says, look, it's a longstanding practice to give the state senator a heads up. I learned about this from a press release. That's not the way you treat a state senator. And Governor Parson's office says, au contraire, mon frère. We reached out to you many months ago about this. And in fact, Stephen, you're just upset because you wanted an appointment, a well-paying, cush appointment to the Missouri Public Service Commission, and we haven't given it to you yet. So you can read about this in the Post-Dispatch today, Brad. I have a link, as always, to a paywall-free version. You can also read it. There's a young guy at the University of Missouri who's doing a really good job on these political stories. His name is Ezra Bitterman, and he has a very high work rate. He cranks out really good, high-quality work. He has a piece in the Columbia Missourian. So, Brad, the short of it is these appointees who are all really, accomplished people. Former Police Chief Dan Isom is among them. I mentioned Winston Calvert, Darrell Gray, Lyda Crewson. Their appointments may fall by the wayside all because of this petty disagreement.
Interesting. Now, do those positions pay very much?
Let me see. I don't think they do, Brad. Now, the PSC role that Steve Roberts allegedly wanted pays $113,000 annually.
Really?
So, I mean, Steve makes a lot more as an attorney than that. But for the amount of hours that you would put in actually attending meetings and doing research for PSC, I think it's a pretty good gig to have. And then also the governor's office says that Steve Roberts was trying to get his father an appointment on the University of Missouri Board of Curators. So I don't know who's to be believed here, Brad.
So if he's making 113 as the PSC person, is that considered a full-time gig, or is that just like part-time?
Oh no, that's part-time. Yeah,
okay.
Like Steve can still do attorney work.
Got $113,000 a year for part-time work. That's almost as good as you and I pulling a shift here in the radio station, right?
Yeah, that's like Egbert profiting off our work. You know what I mean?
Right.
But he's a known capitalist, and I'm not going to begrudge him of that, Brad.
Yes, and we got to say nice things about Egbert because he listens all the time, and that is Eggburt. He's the owner of the radio station. Check it out, Egbert.com. And John sent me this crazy meme yesterday about Egbert, but it was spelled wrong, but that's a whole other story. Okay, we have to take a break. We'll be back.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?